This episode is proudly sponsored by Student Growth Partners, your trusted partner in helping universities grow their enrollments. If you enjoy this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share it with friends who might find it valuable. Your support helps us reach more listeners and continue bringing you expert insights from the world of higher education. Welcome to this latest episode of the Enrollment Clinic. My guest today is Janet Chang. She is the Director of Student Services at Washington University of Science and Technology here in Washington, D.C. And Janet is a good friend of mine as well. So I'm happy to have her on the podcast today. Welcome.
Hi, George. I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
It's great to have you here. So, Janet, you've been in the industry for a long time. I consider you an expert in international student recruitment. So I would love to talk to you a little bit about your historical background. How did you get into education?
I came here as an international student, and then I started as an ESL teacher, and then became a manager, and then I started to direct a language program in Roslyn, Virginia. And then from there, in the early 2000s, there was the Saudi Arabian scholarship program. That's when I started to work with first universities in the area and then universities in the whole country. And then we became a feeder program for all the schools in the United States. That's when I started recruiting more because of that. And then after the school was sold, I became an independent educational consultant doing mostly recruitment from the Gulf countries, the GCC countries, and then from China. And also I worked with a number of universities to assist with the internationalization of their campuses in terms of enrollment management, how to take care of international students, how to grow the numbers in a steady manner. And it was a very, very interesting time.
Yeah. So it's interesting because your experience kind of encompasses everything about international education, right? So from being a student to being an ESL teacher to actually running your own school to then working with various schools. And over this time frame, you've seen the industry change, right? What are some of the things that you've seen kind of change over the years from an international student perspective?
Well, the first phase, I saw a lot of students from the ESL perspective. There were many students from South America and from Japan and Korea, from Europe. I remember if there was a class of 12 or 13 students, there could be 11 nationalities. And then later, the Koreans no longer came as many, and the Japanese no longer came as many. The Venezuelans almost disappeared. But then you began to see the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, then the Chinese. And so in terms of student sources, they have changed significantly over the years.
And do you think this is a geographical trend? I mean, is it just this region that's experiencing these, or just overall there's a kind of fluctuation with some countries becoming more important and some just decline in the number of students coming in?
I would say sometimes it's really the relationships with the United States and also economic development. When the Gulf regions had their gigantic scholarship programs, obviously there were many Arab students who were able to come because their countries gave them scholarships. And then there was the built-in component of the ESL piece, which is 1 to 2 years. So that triggered a flood of Arab students. And then when during the times of President Obama, relationship with China was very good. Then and at that time, the Chinese economy was also booming, and the US education is highly regarded. So we also saw a large number of students from China coming to the United States for top ranking universities. Obviously, a number of them also need ESL education before they can get into those programs. And then a lot of the African countries are also developed very well. So we begin to see students from African countries.
Mm. And at Worcest, I'm gonna just shorten it to Worcest, right? What are some of the biggest cohorts of, what regions of the world do you mostly recruit from?
Well, the cohorts are primarily from South Asia.
Mm,
And initially, we had a much larger population from Bangladesh, followed by it would be India, Pakistan, and Nepal, and some other countries. And then for the past year and a half, we started to diversify our student population. Right now, we have achieved a very happy balance.
What has worked best for you? What are a couple of strategies that have worked best for your institution in reaching international students and then converting them into, matriculation and then obviously um, students there?
We work with recruitment partners, or we call them agents, and we participated or we attended various educational fairs, such as ISEF or sometimes student direct fairs. We also participate in local community events. And on top of everything, we respond very rapidly, and we try to offer good customer service.
Mm. One of the toughest things in our industry, and especially when you're in admissions and you're going to a new country, it's really hard to gauge if that country is actually productive or not. If your presence there is productive or not. When you go into a new country that is not developed for you, do you have, for example, a certain amount of budget or a certain amount of time that you say, this is how much time and money I'm going to dedicate to this market before I say it's productive or not productive for me and pull the plug?
Yes and no.
Okay.
WST is an affordable university. So we first look at who are our best choices of candidates. What kind of student population are we good at serving? And obviously, South Asia is a rapidly developing area where a lot of the students are ambitious, but they don't have a lot of money.
Mm.
But they also value US education. And that's an area I think we would be very successful in. And then in terms of South America or Latin America, many governments have scholarships aiming at the top ranking universities again, but then there are also those young people who are interested in a US education without a lot of money, and WST is definitely a very good choice. And in terms of East Asia, there are two countries we have spent some energy on, would be China and Mongolia. China, most of the young people, their parents would like them to attend top-ranking universities. However, there's also this working group who are in their late 20s or early 30s who are not as happy with their current jobs. Then they would be our choices because they are no longer into a big name like Harvard or Columbia. They are into practical side of things. Come to the US, get a degree, work a little bit, and see if this is what they are looking for. If not, they can go back and work in an industry with an American education that they would have an edge over many other candidates.
One of the things that has happened lately is that Chinese parents are realizing that you don't need to go to a top 15 school in the US, that you can go to a top 50 school, you can go to a top 100 school and get a similar level of education, maybe not the same brand name as well. So over the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see a huge shift in Chinese students actually spreading out and not necessarily looking for, the top 15, top 20 schools in the country as well. Also, one of the things is that Chinese schools are getting very good as well themselves. A few of them now are part of the Times Higher Ed list. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen also from a political perspective between the US and China, since the number of students has decreased a little in the past 5 years.
But George, if you look at the overall trend of China, the trend is increasing. I do agree that many parents want their kids to attend top-ranking universities, but at the same time, when I was in China prior to COVID, I took some admissions directors of various US universities to visit a couple of the chain high schools in the northern parts of China. And oftentimes we had small sessions, maybe 30 to 40 students with their parents all together. They have been pre-selected. And we have very open discussions and open exchanges. I'm like, where do you think you can? Yeah, by the way, China does have many good universities. And I would say, where do you think you can get into in China? Which university would admit you? Do you think Peking University would admit you? Or do you think Fudan will? And they will say, oh, no, we will not. But then why do you think you want to consider Columbia? Where do you think a counterpart in the US would? And then the other thing we keep reminding parents, if your child is smart and intelligent, and he or she can be admitted by George Mason, for example, and if the person gets a 4.0 GPA, and the chances of getting to Columbia or Harvard have increased significantly. And once you have a master's degree from Columbia or Harvard, who would care where you finished your undergrad, right? Yeah. So there are all kinds of discussions that happened, that went on and everything. I think it's not only recently, it has been more than a decade that many parents are very practical. They're sending their children to private schools where they think their kids can have special attention, so they don't get, some bad habits. They don't do certain things that by being afar, they have no control over them. And then some go to public universities because they think with many other American students, they can learn and understand the American culture better. And I've followed a number of them. And I have to say the majority of them are doing well. The majority meaning around 80% are doing okay for those that I have been following.
When we were talking over lunch the other day, you had mentioned that China is still kind of like in your radar, but it's not there yet, for WUST. Has that changed? That's something that, and you had mentioned the issue being that the university is not on the government list. Now, my understanding of the government list is that there is a list and there isn't a list. It's not like Saudi Arabia, for example, where you don't get any money if you're not on the list, right? It's a little different. Is that the case?
Well, for China is a market that no one should not consider. Let's put it that way. It's in one way or another, you give it a lot of attention or you give it enough attention. I think for WST's perspective, this is my personal opinion, not necessarily representative of the other people here, is China should always be given the necessary attention in the areas that many people come to the United States for the purpose of earning a degree and trying to see if they have a future here.
Mhm.
If those people are the ones that WST can attract, then whether WST is on the Ministry of Education of China's recognition list is secondary. For those people who are interested in getting a public who are interested in working for the public sector, then they probably will not choose WST.
Mm,
However,
I
those
see what you
people
mean.
are not our target audience either.
Makes
And
sense.
then and as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, it's a how do you say, it's a big story. I have a lot of information, probably not enough. Even if you're not necessarily on the Ministry of Education's recognition list, you can always have special relationship with, I don't know, Aramco, SABIC, or
Right.
the Ministry of Defense. If they recognize your school, you're still okay by training or educating particular groups, for example.
Got it. Got it. Well, that's an interesting way to go about it, because I know from a past life we've tried really, really hard to get into the Saudi Arabia and the SACM list, and the ESL program was part of the SACM list, but the actual university was not. So I even met with the heads of the program there, and there was no real guarantee that we would be able to get in or not. But it's also interesting because I think at the peak, there were about 178,000 students from Saudi Arabia studying in the US, and now that number has declined dramatically. Do you from your experience, do most of the students from Saudi Arabia go to ESL first, or go through actual degree programs?
Most of them go through the ESL program.
Got it. And then I guess the trajectory is ESL, bachelor's, master's, and forward.
Yes, I've known Saudi students who have been in the country for more than 10 years, and I've known many who have two, three, four children who are born in the US,
Right.
So there's even nowadays some of the US born Saudis are returning for their for their
In your education.
for their college education. Yes.
Fantastic. I mean, and I guess in Tysons, where you're located, there's a kind of flourishing Saudi community over there as well. So it
Yes, and
makes it.
I do feel old because now the kid is 18. Yeah, and remember, imagine when I met the father didn't have the kid. Mm.
That's I think that's an interesting thing of working in education, that you're constantly working with 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds as time goes by, and you forget that you're actually not that old. You're not that age,
Not
right?
that
I
young.
remember I remember when I was managing the team at BAU, sometimes I'd have to sit back and think like, oh my God, I'm actually 20 years older than all of the people that work in here, Um, but it's okay. It keeps you young. When you're working with students, it's just kind of
Yeah. Once upon a time, you're the kind of the equal, or they cannot tell whether you're the teacher or the director or not. Now
yeah,
you're like the mother, right?
that's
And
true.
later
That's
will be
true.
the grandmother or grandfather. Yeah.
That's true. Let's shift gears a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about ESL. It seems to me like ESL used to be a huge component of international education in the US. And now it just seems to me like that's declining a lot. And I think part of it is because there's so many ESL schools in home countries. And it seems to me that even though when I've asked this question, the people in charge of the visas have denied it, but I feel like if you come in for an ESL school, the chances of you getting a visa in the US are much, much, much less than if you come in for a degree. Would you agree?
You want a long answer or the short one?
Either
Not
or.
long, not short. Okay. I think the ESL field, or the component of ESL will continue its importance. Okay, before the Saudi or the Middle Eastern scholarship times, there were many ESL programs, and but the Middle Eastern scholarships and the influx of Chinese students and students from other non-English speaking countries kind of created a period of unnecessary, prosperity that will not last, because that was a period of a sudden influx of Saudi students and Chinese students, which kind of hiked the number 100, 200, a few hundred times. So all of a sudden, 10 ESL programs became maybe 50. And obviously, with COVID, with the King Abdullah Scholarship ending and everything, suddenly you see the dramatic drops. But keep in mind, many of those programs didn't exist prior to CASP, prior to the Chinese. And of course, COVID kind of made many programs kind of shut down more than they should have. So I think the ESL field is in in a stage of rebounding and trying to come to its actual balance. ESL will continue to play an important role because so many students are from countries where English is not the official or is not the language. So they need to have the English proficiency before they can study here or work here. So for people to say that the ESL time is over, I personally do not agree. And as far as visas are concerned, yes, in my from the practical side, the ESL visas are never going to be as easy as someone with an I-20 of a degree program. However, if the person is coming for an ESL program with a conditional offer from a degree program, the chances are much higher.
And what I've noticed in terms of the evolution of ESL is now there's more internal focus, right? Like focusing in the immigrant population in the US and not necessarily just external, a lot of it is trying to avoid the visa situation. And I see a lot of classes such as ESL for healthcare, ESL for construction, ESL for everyday use, just because of that focus. Do you think that will be a growth area, or is it just schools trying to cope with declining numbers?
Well, what you have mentioned is technically called English for specific purposes. That has always been a component in the ESL industry. I think nowadays, because of the immigrants, many immigrants in the United States do not really have the necessary English proficiency. Therefore, it is a growth area in terms of English for legal purposes, English for business, etc., etc. However, I think the intensive English language program, getting students ready for the academic programs, will continue to stabilize. And depending on the number of students wanting to come here for degree programs, I think the number of ESL students will continue to grow.
Now, just kind of going back to Wust a little bit, what is your what do you expect? Where do you expect the growth to be in 5 to 10 years for your institution?
Well, the university will continue to have a very balanced growth, and I think the leadership here has a very, very carefully executed plan. And in 5 to 10 years, WST should have multiple locations inside and outside the United States. And it
Fantastic.
should be able to attract students from all over the world whose primary focus are to come here, earn a practical degree, and find a job to gain experience. And afterwards, they may stay here, they may go back. Hopefully, we'll have a lot of graduates that can
Mm.
return to their home countries to help us get more of their country fellows to come here to study.
And how do you build that affinity with the brand where, students graduate and then they come back and help the institution grow? How do you develop that brand connection?
Well, we try to provide them with the best possible service we can give. And we have a lot of, WST has currently only 1,800 or 900 students in total. So we're still relatively small. So the personal connection is there. I think if you're nice to people, people are going to be nice to you. If you help them at the early stage of their, arrival here, and they're going
Mm.
to do the same. Yeah. And once they graduate, once they land a good job, they feel very, proud, and they definitely would like their, family members or friends to come here. And South Asian, South America and African countries are very, how do you say, group-minded, lots
Mm.
of children, lots of cousins,
Lots of
right?
friends. Yeah, yeah.
Nephews and nieces. So if we get a small percentage of that, you can imagine the school will probably multiply. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And obviously, friends and family are the two biggest influencers in the school that you're going to attend anyway. So, building that relationship definitely brings that aura with it. I have a final question for you. This has been extremely informational, and it's great to have you. And I'm hoping we can do this again at another time. What do you think the industry will look like in the next 10 years with specifically with this introduction of AI, with just the way the education market is going with, for example, you mentioned Worcester is looking at some point, ideally would want to have campuses outside the US. A lot of US institutions are doing that right now, right? Opening campuses everywhere. So what do you see the industry doing in the next 10 years?
I think the industry will continue to evolve and adapt to the unavoidable changes that are coming. I think for newer schools like WST and some others in the area, there is a lot, or it's going to be a lot easier for the newer ones to adapt to the changes. I think it is the traditional schools that have been around for over 100 years that they
Mm.
need to make a lot of fundamental changes. I think education will be more targeted, will be more either career focused or research focused. People are learning skills. They don't need information or certain knowledge. If it is very theoretical, it's not going to be very important. And elementary information, entry-level information may be taken care of by AI. So what are the humans need to know and learn in order to function successfully in that future AI
Mm.
heavily involved world? It's something for a lot of the key educators to think about and adapt very quickly and rapidly in order for those institutions to continue their success. And the same for us as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we can do this again at another time.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks.